Iranian aggression tops the news with the Israeli reportedly targeting an Iranian arms shipment in Syria that was reportedly intercepted en route to Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon. At the same time, reports emerged from Washington indicating that Iran, while not seeking a weapon at this time, is potentially only 2 weeks away from creating a bomb. And we get more from ILTV's Steve Leibovich.
The IDF allegedly struck an Iranian weapons shipment near Damascus that was allegedly en route to Lebanon. No injuries were reported. The targeted sites in al-Dimas, just west of Damascus, belong to the Syrian army and pro-Iranian militia groups. Syrian air defense fired at the intruding aircraft. The IDF does not comment on specific airstrikes in Syria, but confirms having conducted numerous strikes against Iran-backed groups attempting to gain a foothold in Syria. Turning to the Iranian nuclear issue, a new U.S. government report titled 2023 Strategy for Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction identified the Islamic Republic as a persistent threat and warned that it could build a nuclear weapon in 2 weeks' time. At the same time, the U.S. nuclear report said that Iran is not currently pursuing a weapons program. In the report, the U.S. also criticized Iran for its non-compliance with obligations under the Chemical Weapons Convention. Washington says the regime in Tehran has developed a dual-use central nervous system chemical for offensive purposes. The report identified the Islamic Republic as a regional threat to the Middle East that must be addressed. Separately in Washington, the U.S. has acknowledged that Iran has successfully put an imaging satellite into orbit. The launch of the Noor 3 satellite last week was the latest successful launch by the Iranian space program after a series of failed launches in recent years.
And joining us now to elaborate further is Middle East expert Dr. Mordechai Kedar. Moti, a new report out of Washington indicates that Iran is potentially only 2 weeks away from a nuclear weapon. From what you know, is that an accurate assessment? And the view of the Israeli security establishment, really?
Look, I believe that what the Americans publicize, the Israeli security establishment knows even before. There is a close cooperation between the two states, and what we see is only the top of the iceberg from the information which countries hold. So if they say that the Iranians are 2 weeks from a bomb, it doesn't really matter if it's 2 weeks or a month. We are talking about the capability of Iran to run forward in order to acquire nuclear weapons. And this is what has to make everybody very worried.
And what is that capability right now?
I have no sources which say otherwise, but therefore I do take what is being publicized by the Americans as something which is correct.
Now, you know, the Iranian delivery systems are moving forward. So is its satellite program, isn't it fair to say that Iran is effectively, you know, already a nation with a nuclear weapon? I mean, what is 2 weeks?
Definitely, Iran should be dealt with as a country which, in spite of all the bans and all the restrictions and all the sanctions, succeeded very well how to con the world and to run forward in a program which originally it was not allowed to begin with. So the world has to look very carefully to make the account. How come a rogue state like Iran succeeded to do something which the whole world practically objects? How could they do it? And let me tell you, they are, in my humble view, they are getting support either from the Chinese or from the Russians. North Koreans are working there and delivering all kinds of information. And I'm afraid that also people in the West cooperate with Iran, mainly for money. And definitely this is what happens. Don't forget that after the Soviet Union collapsed, many scientists who worked in the Soviet nuclear programs migrated to Iran, and they gave a real boost to the Iranian nuclear program as of the early 90s. So this is what happened, and the result is what we see today.
Moti, between its moves in Syria and Lebanon and its nuclear program, challenges to the U.S. fleet, satellite capabilities, what would you say is the current near-term strategic objective here?
Iran is trying to be a superpower both on the regional level and in the global level as well. Iran is not, it's not a small country. It's a country of almost 100 million people. And the regime doesn't have to give account to anyone because this is a dictatorial regime. The people could suffer. People could be hungry. They don't care. They run forward in the quest to become a superpower that nobody in the world will interfere in their own domestic issues. And this is their goal.
And, the goal is never good for Israel. Of course, we'll keep on following. Thank you so much, Moti, for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Experience the power of truth with ILTV News. If you're looking for quality content and captivating visuals, join our news community and become an integral part of our team as we embark on a mission to unveil the real Israel, dismantling the web of lies and misinformation that surround reporting on Israel. By subscribing to ILTV News, you will not only have access to the latest updates, but you will also amplify our message, creating a ripple effect that carries the truth far and wide. Subscribe today and help reshape the narrative. Available on the web, Android, and Apple.
A basic framework is in place for potential Israel-Saudi normalization. That's now the official word from the White House, with officials saying that Israel and Saudi Arabia are moving toward the outline of an historic U.S. brokered deal. Washington also cautions there are compromises to be made by all the sides, and ILTV's Steve Leibovich has more.
In his recent address to the UN, Prime Minister Netanyahu said Israel was at the cusp of a transformative peace agreement with Saudi Arabia. Such a peace, said Netanyahu, will go a long way to ending the Arab-Israel conflict and enhance the prospects of peace with the Palestinians. Netanyahu's optimistic view on a deal being within reach is now the official position coming out of Washington, with officials going on the record to say that a basic framework for Israeli-Saudi normalization is already in place. At the same time, officials point out that the deal is complex and to be completed will require compromise by all sides. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby was quoted by reporters saying all sides have hammered out a basic framework for what might be. But, as in any complex arrangement, as this will inevitably be, everybody is going to have to do something, and everybody is going to have to compromise on some things, Kirby said. The United States is trying to broker this deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia to normalize diplomatic relations after Israel already normalized ties with the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco in 2020, and previously forged ties with Egypt and Jordan. The Palestinian issue remains a potential sticking point in the negotiations. The Biden administration is reportedly pushing Israel to make concessions to the Palestinians as part of a potential deal. Netanyahu may be constrained by his far-right coalition partners who oppose concessions. The Palestinian Authority has presented a list of potential steps it would like to see taken in the context of the normalization talks with Washington and Riyadh. Saudi Arabia has also reportedly been seeking security guarantees, including a defense treaty, advanced weapons, and a civilian nuclear program from Washington in return for normalizing relations with Israel.
And joining us now with more details on the closer-than-ever Saudi-Israel deal is President of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, Dan Dyker. Dan, Washington is now saying the framework of an agreement is in place. From what we know, what is likely inside this framework?
The framework's in place, meaning there are certainly important conversations between the three players, the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. One of the key issues is going to be, as U.S. spokesman John Kirby said, there's going to have to be concessions all around. And one of the major, concessions that the Saudis are making is that they're not insisting on a Palestinian state, which was the essence of the 2002 Arab peace plan. So the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has come quite a distance from where his father had been back 21 years ago. From Israel's standpoint, there's also going to be some concessions which we don't know about yet. The assessment is that Israel's major concession may well be on the issue of a Saudi civilian nuclear program with stopgap measures and security guarantees, rather than making the traditional, concessions on the Palestinian issue, which traditionally has been back to fragile, indefensible 1967 lines, which no Israeli government would be able to countenance.
Dan, Washington is also clearly saying that there are issues to be worked out, and the Palestinian issue is among them, as really you mentioned. What could be in a framework agreement that might be acceptable to really by all sides?
It's a good question. I think in the direction of an answer would be there is really nothing that could satisfy the Palestinian leadership, because the Palestinian leadership has proved that it is the problem, not the solution. And it has proven that not only to Israel, but it's proven that to the Middle East Sunni-led establishment, which is led by Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. So this is what needs to be understood. That when we talk about the Palestinian issue, it seems very clear that the Saudis are talking about massive increase of economic aid and not a top-down agreement, which would include some sort of full-blown Palestinian state, which anybody who has eyes in his head would understood that it would become a Palestinian terror state, either run by radical PLO factions or terror-supporting PA or even the Hamas. So this has become very clear, I think, to Israel's Saudi interlocutors and potential partners in this normalization agreement, so that it would be much more assistance along the lines of let's say, infrastructure, schools, hospitals, and overall employment, increased employment for Palestinian workers coming into Israel. But clearly, Israel will always have to have full responsibility for Area C, probably with a probability of annexing or applying Israeli law to Area C. It's already conceded areas A and B practically to the Palestinian Authority. So in short, we're really looking to, as the Saudis are, to a very potentially prosperous, stable, secure Palestinian authorities, so some sort of city, what they call a federal city-state, or some sort of confederal relationship potentially with Jordan.
Meanwhile, the White House officials are saying that all sides must compromise. Do you yet know on what issues Israel might be asked to compromise that could cross the red lines for Israel?
Well, there are some real disagreements between the Biden administration and the Netanyahu-led coalition, especially this particular coalition, which is the most ideologically and hawkish coalition in many years. And the notion that the Americans have been very clear that they're looking for major territorial concessions from Israel, which neither this Israeli government nor any other government led by any other prime minister, center, whether it's a center-left, center-right government, would be able to make the kinds of territorial compromises that the Biden administration is looking for. So this is really the sticking point. Here's the real irony. The real irony is that the sticking point is not between Israel and the Saudis, it's between Israel and the Americans. And I think that there are many red lines there, whether it's Israel's requirement, absolute requirement for defensible borders, the Alon plan at a very minimum, as well as airspace control, electromagnetic control by Israel. There's a real serious ongoing terror phenomenon coming from the hills of Judea and Samaria, from areas under Palestinian Authority control, from Gaza, which is now threatening a third or a little bit more of Israel, from the south to the south center of Israel. So these are real serious national security issues that Israel is raising. It seems it's been very difficult for the Biden administration to shake itself of the former Obama administration's demands that former Secretary of State Kerry and President Obama had raised in 2015, 2016. But clearly Israel has learned in blood and treasure that it simply cannot make additional territorial concessions and remain a viable state.
Dan, always a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us today, and Chag Sameach.
Thank you all so much, and happy holidays. Chag Sameach, Moedim L'Simcha.